It's been 6 months now and Glenn hasn't been working. His attitude has completely changed and he's been leaving the house every day for hours and liming with his friends and coming home drunk and causing confusion.
Gloria, this is what you cook today? This is not enough food for a big man like me.
But Glenn, it's been 6 months now. You haven't given me any money to shop for food.
Okay, so what you want me to do if my boss ain't called me out for work as yet?
Look for a different job now.
What you just said to me?
Get a next job.
What?
Help! Let me go!
Let go what? Yeah, let's see what we happening. Let go what? Watch your mouth with me now.
Every day mom and dad fight. When are they going to stop?
Domestic violence is not just physical, it's mental, emotional, economical, and psychological. If you, your friend or family member is being abused, you can contact one of the numbers listed below for help. Department of Gender Affairs 662-5492, Special Victims Unit 662-7077, Counseling Unit 465-5000. This message was brought to you by the Department of Gender Affairs in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and the Pan American Health Organization.
Special panel discussion which is being hosted by the Department of Gender Affairs as part of commemorating the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So November 25th is recognized as the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and this date signals the start of 16 days of campaigns around the world where we raise awareness and advocate for issues around gender-based violence. The theme for this year's elimination of violence against women is Orange the World, End Gender-Based Violence Now. And so in keeping with this theme, the topic for our panel discussion this evening is Building Back Better, Facing Gender-Based Violence Head On. This evening, we'll be talking and discussing the status of gender-based violence locally, right here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and we'll be trying to understand some of the challenges with combating gender-based violence and identify some ways to improve on these challenges. I am your host this evening. My name is Iseline Phillip, and I'm really pleased to be facilitating this panel discussion this evening, mainly for two reasons. I have particular interest in issues pertaining to women and gender studies, as that is what my qualification and expertise is in, with a specialized focus in policy development and implementation. And also, secondly, I come to this table with a particular interest and passion for issues around this, having experiential knowledge as someone who has my own unique experiences when it comes to experiencing gender-based violence. And so I am pretty honored, and I'm very interested in making sure we facilitate discussion in a way that respects survivors and victims, known and unknown, and do so in a way that also honors the sensitivities around this very complex topic. So, at this time, I'd like to introduce the panelists we have this evening, and we have quite a few different panelists to share different perspectives on the issues and challenges when it comes to gender-based violence. So we'll begin with Mr. Vaughn Woodley, who is a public prosecutor working with Legal Aid. Mr. Woodley is here representing Legal Aid as the acting director. We also have Ms. Nadia Rollins, who is a clinical counselor from the National Counseling Center. We also have Mrs. Chanel Charles, who is a senior officer working in the Department of Gender Affairs. And later this evening, we will also hear from Ms. Mary Keynes, who is the president of the SKN Women's Council, representing the NGO sector working on issues and with women in these spaces. So thank you all, panelists, for being here. So we'll dive right into conversation this evening, and I kind of want to start with Mr. Woodley to give us a little definition of exactly what we're talking about. So setting the parameters for our discussion this evening, can you tell us what is the legal definition that we have for gender-based violence or for domestic violence that we have?
Good evening, Ms. Phillip. I'm going to read directly from the legislation, and it says that domestic violence means any controlling or abusive behavior that harms the health, safety or well-being of a person or any child, and includes but not limited to the following, meaning that this violence can be physical, which we are all familiar with, sexual, emotional, and it includes verbal or psychological abuse, and there's economic abuse, or more commonly known as financial abuse, and then there's intimidation, harassment, and stalking. I think that deals with the definition, and it's a broader definition as one could imagine.
Yes, and I think that's really good. I didn't realize that it was so broad, including intimidation as well. So just kind of to reiterate, so you said physical, sexual, emotional, verbal, psychological, intimidation. So it's, as you said, very broad and covers, quite a few things. So one of the things that I think we want to start with, I want to just kind of quote some statistics. Since it's very broad, there's a lot that's included when it comes to gender-based violence or domestic violence. So globally, the global statistic is in terms of, particularly for women who are affected by gender-based violence, is 1 in 3. So international figures, it's 1 in 3 women have been abused in some way. That's based on any of these definitions that you just listed. And particularly in St. Kitts, we've actually seen an increase in the number of reports when it comes to domestic violence. And so just to quote some stats, so I have just for this year alone in 2021, the quarterly reports from the police, the Royal St. Christopher and Nevis Police Force shows that, so for the first quarter, that's January to March, there was a reported 151 cases, and that covers the various types of domestic violence that we see. That includes verbal, sexual, physical. They also include property damage and psychological abuse. So 151, that was just from January to March. Then from April to June, we had a reported 126 cases of domestic violence. And then for the third quarter, that's July to September, there's a reported 166 cases. So far for this year, we actually have a total of, 443 reports, and that's just for the first 3 quarters of the year. And this is actually statistics that shows that trends have increased, particularly when it comes to COVID-19. We've seen that there's been increases in numbers. Now, that brings me to the question as to, we do have a Domestic Violence Act. And so, Mr. Woodley, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the different types of legal protections that individuals have under this act. What are those, and what does the act do? What is it intended to do? Tell us a little bit about the legal aspect.
Well, the primary aim of the act is to protect individuals from violence. Basically, violence in the home. The main protection is that of the court. And once an individual is a victim of domestic abuse or domestic violence, they can approach the court. And once they approach the court can grant particular orders. There's one in particular, or a popular one, a protection order, where the court ensures the safety of any victim of abuse. And then quite often persons may not want to approach the court. They might approach the police, and the legislation empowers the police to offer protection to any individual who claims to be a victim of domestic violence.
Okay, so in reviewing the act myself, you spoke to protection orders, and typically, so is it the court that grants protection orders, or can a police who is responding to an incident of domestic violence?
Only the court can grant a protection order.
Okay, yeah. So are you able to speak a little bit to the role of the police when it comes to at least the role that's specified within the act?
Well, what the act particularly speaks about is that it says that the police should assist a person who has suffered injury.
Okay.
And that is very broad. So assist means if they need to be taken to the hospital. So I think the act contemplates if there's an injury, the police should assist in taking that person to the hospital. Not only taking the person physically to the hospital, but offers protection. So put them in a safe place. Quite often the violence can be, actual physical violence where another individual from the home might be pursuing them to them real harm. The police can offer that kind of protection. Not only that, but I know in an offline discussion we had the focus is not so much on children, but just to touch on it briefly. But if a child is involved, the police can take that child from the home and put it in a safe home, maybe with a family, a friend, or somebody from the community.
Okay. So in your work with legal aid, do you typically support persons who have been affected by domestic violence very often? Do you have large numbers? How does the service for legal aid typically work? Do you get referrals? Do people just walk in?
Well, I need to put a caveat on that.
Sure.
I just have been placed at legal aid.
Oh, okay.
Temporarily, I must add. But based on the information I've gathered, persons often are referred.
Okay.
And you have a few walk-ins. Somebody might walk in and say that, they may not call it economic abuse. They might indicate that a spouse is not paying them, a spouse is not supporting them as they should. And again, I'm including this because economic abuse is very important.
Absolutely.
Because we know we have households that while you might have man, woman in the household, especially if it's a common law relationship, the woman often carries the burden. And therefore she needs that kind of financial support. So they may come in and they might say something to the effect that he is not doing what he's supposed to do financially. You see, and then we can take the matter to the court. Okay?
So in instances like that where there's economic abuse, what types of protections does the Act offer? So one thing I saw that I thought was quite interesting in my own reviews, that in the miscellaneous section of the Act, there is actually protection of mortgage. Are you able to speak to that? What does that really mean? What kind of protection is that?
Protection of mortgage is basically ensuring that one party, I don't want to be biased and say that the man should, but whoever is the negligent party, the court can make an order for them to pay the mortgage.
Okay.
Okay?
And so that would be considered as part of the economic protection.
The economic protection, right.
Okay.
Or it might be a situation where, let's use our reality. Generally, it's the man who provides for the family.
True, right.
Sure. I'm not saying things are changing and women, could be making more money. But quite often, if you have the woman who is basically a stay-at-home mother or a stay-at-home wife, common law or whether legal, the court can ensure that she receives a particular sum of money to ensure that she is maintained, the child is maintained properly, and the household is maintained.
Okay. So just in terms of other protections, I also see that there's also occupation orders. So that there are instances where, you have two people in a household, you have a couple, you have a family, where, let's say, even though the male may be the one who is paying the mortgage, but because they may be of threat to the woman and the children, that they be ordered out. Is that what an occupation order is? Or just in terms of protections? Because I think typically, often we see that victims are also oftentimes doubly victimized, where they're the ones who experience the violence and then the ones who have to get up, leave, and start again.
No, the protection order is slightly different. This is where the court orders, not the protection order, the occupation order, where the court orders that the person can occupy a particular premises.
Oh, okay.
So quite often, well, not often, sometimes I might find a situation might arise where a spouse or a party, I'm trying not to use man and woman, because it could be the woman is pushing the man out,
Could be.
And not the man pushing the woman out. So it can be where a party is being pushed out the home onto the streets. The court can make an occupation order for that party to occupy the premises or a particular premises.
Okay, so then what is the difference between an occupation order and a tenancy order as part of the protections that I see listed in the Act?
Well, the tenancy order is where a tenancy exists. And hope I'm being clear enough. And if I'm not, please tell me. Where the court makes an order for somebody to remain a tenant in a property. It is very, very similar.
Oh, okay.
It's very similar.
Interesting. Of course.
The victim who is being abused, so the court can order the perpetrator out of the home and leave the victim in.
No, that would be the occupation order. But what would be the tenancy order is where the court, I need to add this, ensures that the person who is the abuser pays the rent.
Okay, that's the tenancy order.
That's the tenancy order.
Okay.
So you might be thinking, because again, I notice how the different abuses might be linked.
Right.
So somebody might be thinking, okay, I'm not gonna pay the rent. And if I'm not paying the rent, you're gonna have to get out the house. What the court would do, the court would ensure that whoever, I'm almost going to say the man.
The victim.
The victim.
Yes.
The court ensures that the victim has a place to live.
Right.
By making the abuser pay the rent. Of course, if the abuser can pay the rent.
Of course.
Because sometimes the abuser can be an indigent person also.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so well, or somebody without means. So it's not all the time the abuser has financial power.
That's true.
Sometimes it could be that might be the reason for the violence. Because the abuser may not have access to money, and therefore they use their power elsewhere.
That's right.
So they become abusive.
Right.
And I also wanted to add with the economic and financial, it could be that the abuser is not allowing the victim to work.
That's true.
Right? So you're
Yes.
not allowed to work. So I have this control over you. I'm not allowed to work. So, I'm in control of the money. So what I say goes. So that's a part of the economic and financial
Yes.
abuse as well.
Yes, and I'm glad you piped up there, Ms. Rollins, because I'm on to you next. So Mr. Woodley spoke about the different ways that these abuses are connected and linked.
Right.
And so one of the things that I think there's a certain myth around gender-based violence is that, physical violence is typically it, and that's where it starts and that's where it ends. But
Right.
oftentimes, that's not where that's not what it is in reality.
True.
Because in reality, oftentimes physical violence is preempted by emotional abuse.
Right.
And so I want you to speak a little bit to that, as a clinical counselor. Can you tell us, just give us a little definition of what exactly is emotional and psychological abuse? Because we know that's also covered under the Act. So
Right.
tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so basically that's ways to control someone using emotions. So anything that manipulates the mind. So we have criticizing, embarrassing, manipulation, using hurt and fear, those kind of things,
Right.
So they would use, in a sense, like using sarcasm, to say hurtful things.
Like gaslighting.
And gaslighting, scapegoating, all of
Yes.
those kind of things. So that's basically, that covers, emotional
Right.
abuse. And for me, we have this old adage, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never harm me, and that is
Absolutely not.
furthest from the truth.
It
I
is.
never agree with that at all, because this emotional abuse, the verbal abuse, the psychological abuse, the words, when the wounds heal, the words is what is long lasting, and I guess
That's right.
Chanel can talk about that as well.
Right. But before we move on, I still want to stick with you a little bit. So, I definitely, when it comes to, this point of emotional abuse, I think it's really, really important for us to really understand and recognize, even though we've seen statistically increases in reports of violence, we need to also understand that there's still a lot of people who are not reporting.
Right,
And
right.
particularly that may be because of when you're in a situation where you're going through emotional abuse, sometimes victims may not even recognize that they're being emotionally abused.
Indeed, indeed.
And
yes.
so, because of that, the layers, the shame that you might experience, the doubts in yourself, just the justifications that you may have just because you don't want to admit that this is happening to you, that is connected to the emotional abuse.
Exactly.
And so
Yes.
my question then to you is, obviously in terms of your space and place, working with the National Counseling Center, is this, do you tend to see victims of abuse? Do they come on their own, or do you typically have to get referrals? Is that something that you...
Well, it's both. We get referrals from gender quite often, and of course there are persons who come in on their own, and it could be because somebody would have encouraged them to come, or they in themselves figured like this is the time for me to get some help. So we typically, as I said, referrals or walk-ins as well.
And are those services usually provided at a cost, or is it free?
Well, the National Counseling Center is free. It's government owned, so this is free. But of course, there are private counselors that they can also reach out to.
And that's good to know. This in terms of we're just setting the context and understanding what the status is of the situation and supports here in St. Kitts. So we know there's free services available, especially if there are any victims who at this time may be seeking support.
Right.
So I just want to know. I'll pop over now to Mrs. Charles Chanel. From the Department of Gender Affairs. So we've had a bit of, the legal framework around the act and what it means, and understanding what emotional violence is and why that's so important and central. So from your position working with the Department of Gender Affairs, what is your perspective? What do you see often? Because I imagine persons come to the department for different reasons. So what are some of the common things that you see when it comes to the current status of gender-based violence in St. Kitts and Nevis working on the ground in your position? Chanel.
Somehow I thought it was
I'm sorry, that question was for you.
Okay, for us it's a process.
Okay.
We work with counseling units. So first of all, sometimes we do get the cases, hands-on. The persons come straight to gender affairs. But sometimes they also go to the special victims unit. So it's a process for us. Special victims will send their clients down to us, and with the client's permission and their needs, they would tell us, okay, they want counseling, or they would need legal advice, or they would need legal representation, or if it's just that they need some social assistance. So we are like the channel that would lead you where you would want to go.
Okay.
So we basically are the referral department, along with being, the advocate. Right? When you talk about on the grounds, and what do you see on the grounds happen, is that when I spoke about being advocates, there are victims that we have on the grounds who don't know services do exist.
Right.
And, most times people would say they don't know that there is a gender affairs. And then we have those sarcastic ones who would say, it's women affairs. But it's not anymore. It's gender affairs.
Absolutely.
Means we are here to access whether it's a man, it's a woman, well, child also, because we also have under our umbrella of social services, probation and child protection services. So if there's a case that comes into me and the child is affected somehow, we also refer to probation and child protection services. Because, there's also, they have their act.
That's right.
Right, so we are just here to direct where you need to go. And to make sure that, this is one thing that I want people to know. Gender affairs make sure that the process is completed. You make a statement at the police. If you find that they're lagging behind, or you need an update, we can get that update. What's happening? So we follow the train.
Right.
You wanted legal representation, we can refer you to legal aid, or we have other pro bono lawyers that we refer persons to. So we keep following you. And when you get to the magistrate court or to the high court, we would know okay, they got there and these were the final rulings or the verdicts. So we make sure that the victim gets to the end of the chain.
Right. Okay. That's really good to know. Thank you for that. So when we are thinking about, so just in terms of the number of reports that we have, like I said, just statistics show that in St. Kitts and Nevis, we have had, the trend is that we're seeing an increase in the number of reports of cases of domestic violence and abuse. So not only is it showing, reflecting in our data, even though we already know that this is a very serious social problem, we're seeing that persons are now becoming a lot more confident, comfortable, actually reporting this abuse and this violence, which is very good. And one of the things that I think, we want to reiterate again is that when it comes to violence, we're not just talking about, the men are also affected by gender-based violence. And I think that's very important for us to point out. And even in the statistics and the reports from the police department, we see that male reporting is also on the increase. They actually break it down in terms of male and female, which is very good. And also similarly for the offenders. So we have, when it comes to gender-based violence, we're not just talking about a phenomenon that affects women. We also acknowledge and recognize that there are men who also are victims of this sort of domestic violence, and that we have females who are perpetrators of this violence. And so even from a counseling perspective, Ms. Rollins, so this may be just the gendered aspect, if we apply a gendered lens to it, why, in terms of the challenges that you might see, why victims may not seek counseling. Can you speak a little bit to that, to some of the reasons why persons may not seek counseling or otherwise?
And okay, well, some of the reasons are similar to why persons in general don't seek counseling. Basically that, they feel ashamed. They feel frightened, and they may, have that fear of being judged and misunderstood. So they tend to not want to seek counseling services. And Ms. Charles can tell you, sometimes we get referrals and sometimes they don't show up. And we would call and that kind of thing, but it's difficult for them to face this, and difficult for them to get help, because their thoughts are distorted. You're still trying to figure things out. You still feel like you're the one to blame, and the emotional abuse, the psychological abuse, that verbal abuse. Basically broke you. You basically broke you, so it did a number on your self-esteem. So you're unable to, step up and get the help that you want.
And Ms. Rollins said it right when she said, the things that, they would look at instead of coming to counseling, because they would ask me now, so who am I going to see?
Yes.
When I say you would see Mrs. Blake, who is Mrs. Blake? Can you tell me who specifically I will see? I'm like, I can't tell you. The counselors are professional. They were trained, to take care of your issue and to reel you back into some sense of normalcy. But I can't tell you who you are going to see. But Ms. Wallen said it right.
That's all part of the fear and the shame, because they wouldn't want to come to somebody that they're very familiar with, and it's kind of hard to avoid because we're in a small society, so we're gonna know each other, so in situations like that, I myself always ask you first, are you comfortable? We know each other. Are you comfortable with me, or would you prefer to go to someone else? Because that kind of put a little ease with them. But Chanel is right. They always would like to know who they're gonna go to, because they are afraid of you being too close to them, and they might see you often, so they don't want to have that shame, reliving that shame whenever they see you.
And they don't like to change counselors either. If they were seeing Miss Rollins and they have to go to maybe Miss Blake, they would want to know, why do I have to change? Who is this person though that I'm changing to now?
It's a whole lot.
It's a lot.
Indeed. And so I want to hang on. So we already, as a society, culturally, are not big on mental health. And so that's understandable. And then now when it comes specifically to having experienced gender-based violence of any sort, you talk about the shame that's attached to that. And I think, part of the awareness building and the advocacy is really important for us to really be able to remove some of these myths and break these perceptions that gender-based violence happens to a certain type of person, and that looks a certain type of way. And because I think oftentimes we hear about these things, we hear these stories, and we automatically assume it's a woman. We automatically assume that she's undereducated. We automatically assume that she's from a lower class or from a lower earning income bracket. We automatically assume that she has some history of violence in her life or her upbringing or experience. But I think definitely if there's one thing I want to leave with people tonight is that is absolutely not the case when it comes to experiences of gender-based violence. And so,
happen to anyone.
Pardon?
It can happen to anyone.
Absolutely, it can happen to anyone. And so I think when it comes to, we have this certain kind of thing of this politics of respectability is what they call it in the academic sense, where we tend to find that because of these perceptions and these myths, it pushes more persons into silence. And at least, for the very least, we need to be able to normalize conversations like these and normalize the encouraging of persons seeking assistance, especially counseling, because that is, as you said, very important, especially if you've been experiencing emotional abuse and experiencing it for a prolonged period of time. And so on that, I just want to know, kind of bring it back around to our legal expert here and ask a question when it comes to, if you're in a situation, I'm just curious to know, you work in law as a public prosecutor. Are you able to speak a little bit to, persons or like the rate at which the process goes? If persons are seeking justice, do we often get persons charged in terms of offense? If persons are seeking justice for violence that they've received, what types of compensation or what sort of justice does the court dish out in situations of abuse?
Okay. I would say most certainly. However, that it is not generally publicized at the end of our court proceedings. Maybe that might be a shortcoming. It is not publicized. The outcome is not publicized. But I've seen in cases where the court, in passing its judgment, it can make a compensation order. That is the criminal court, that is. So just let me use a concrete example. So if I'm tempted to say a man again, but let's say a person, abuser breaks the other party's arm, and that matter proceeds to court. The court can, besides sending that person to prison or some other type of punishment, can order compensation for that party.
And in those instances, does the victim in the case have any say in terms of the type of justice they wish to receive?
They can. They can. But bear in mind, punishment is the total jurisdiction of the judge or the court. So sometimes you might have a situation where the person might say they don't want the person to go to jail. And the court might consider that. Because sometimes you might think going to prison might be the only type of punishment that's available. But there's a wide range of punishments that are available to the criminal court. But the court could consider what a victim might want.
And another question for you. So within the legal framework and space, so if I report an incident to the Special Victims Unit, and this report is on file, and I say, I don't want to press charges today. But a month later, after I've had some counseling and I've developed my confidence, I decide I do want my perpetrator to be held accountable. Is there any time limitation legally that prohibits me from then saying, I want this case to go to court?
No. No and yes. There's a limitation of 6 years with regards to certain criminal matters. But no, I do not believe, I've never seen a situation where a victim waits so long as 6 years
Right, of
to say they don't want a matter or they want a matter to be prosecuted.
Okay.
So, but to answer your question, yes, it can happen. They might come and say something of, I've known of situations where a victim might say, you know, we want you to speak to them. You see, but you need to understand the police process and the
Right.
court process.
Okay.
So you have the charging stage. So once the police charges the individual for a criminal offense, that matter goes to the DPP department, the Director of Public Prosecutions. And then that person, the victim, sometime comes to the department and they might say that they do not want to proceed. But what you need to remember is that the Director of Public Prosecutions has the sole discretion whether or not to prosecute a matter,
right.
not a victim.
That's
okay,
right.
not a victim.
And that is because it's a case, the Crown is prosecuting.
The Crown is prosecuting,
Right.
and the public has an interest to ensure that certain matters are prosecuted.
Right.
So let me use another concrete example. For example, rape.
Right.
You know, somebody might be a victim of rape, and for a number of reasons, they may not want to proceed. So they might come to the court. They might not the court. They might come to the department that is the Director of Public Prosecution. I know I'm here representing
Legal
the
aid.
legal aid as
Right.
the acting director, but most of the work that I do or would have done is at the DPP department.
It's good insight to have. Please continue. It's okay.
And so what happens is that a consideration must be made not just to the victim, but to the public interest in having the matter prosecuted.
Okay.
So you cannot just come to and say, oh, you don't want it
Right.
anymore.
Well, I think that's certainly a good thing in terms of the way that this crime is taken so seriously by the state. I think that's very important. And, you know, just coming back to my original question, for victims to know and understand that if you report the crime today, that there's no limitation on your decision to then, you may say, I don't want to press charges today, but maybe I want to press charges next week. And the court still, you know, the court still has an obligation to, once it gets to that point, once a person is charged, they have an obligation to prosecute.
Yep.
So that's great. Yes.
And from the counseling and psychological standpoint, you find that there's a lot of self-doubt and fear in terms of the pressing charges. So you'll find that you may have some client who comes in and says, I want him or her to pay, right? And, you know, going through the process, then that might change to, you know, I don't want them to go to jail. And especially if children are involved, you know, that and Ms. Charles can tell you, that of course adds another layer to it, because,
Absolutely.
you know, I don't want this father to go to jail, I don't want, so it's a lot of things that would have caused, you know, that back and forth in terms of just talk to them or I change my mind, that kind of thing.
Right. And I'm glad that you raised that, because I think we also need to be able, we may not all be able to empathize with victims and survivors, but we can extend compassion and try to understand,
Right,
especially when it comes to individuals who may have a hard time leaving these situations, or who we may know. So I might be a neighbor, and I might know, every night I hear you over there arguing, but at the same time I see you every morning kissing goodbye and saying whatever. And I think we need to, as a society, as a social, cultural thing, we need to be able to be less judgmental and more compassionate, to be able to understand that in this situation, especially when you're, again, experiencing emotional abuse for a prolonged period of time, it is very difficult. It's like, you know, you're going back and forth in minds.
Right.
Yes,
You know,
exactly,
you're going back and forth in minds, and then when you have other things to consider, you may not be the primary person bringing in the income, you have children to consider, and you're thinking, I've invested so much in this life.
Right.
It is very hard to start again.
Agreed. And you see, and society from the outside looking in, why can't she leave? Like, as you said, I'm hearing every night that this is going on, and she's not leaving. Why is she not leaving?
Right.
You know, but there's so many factors as to why they don't leave.
Right.
And the public needs to be more sensitized as to, you know, reasons why victims won't leave.
Yes, agreed.
Right? Because they tend to, call them names and say, well, that can't be me. It can't be you until it happens to you.
Right. Exactly.
And then we would see your reaction. Because normally I would tell people, okay, since that you're saying that, would you take her in with her children? Would you support her financially with your own money?
Right.
I don't have it. Okay, so don't say that.
Right.
Because we don't know why people stay.
Right.
Right.
And that's the thing again, we with these points that we're making, it's about, as an individual, as a person, member in society, to be less judgmental and try to be more compassionate, even where you're not able to be empathetic. And I think one of the things that, coming back to, the act that we have, which is, I think, we have a couple strong points in the act where if you are a neighbor, I think we need to be able, in being compassionate, also to be able to be supportive and encouraging so that persons can eventually get the strength and confidence to make the choice on their own.
Yes.
And I believe in the act there is, under police powers, police actually have a duty to respond regardless as whether it's the victim who's reporting or someone else. So if you are the neighbor and you're hearing this every night, please know you can call the police, and the police have a duty to respond. If you say, I suspect domestic violence is happening in the home next to me, please come check it out. That is how you can be a supportive member of society to a situation, So I would, and Mr. Woodley, you can confirm whether that is in fact true under the police powers based on my reading of the act. Is that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So we will take a quick break. I want to thank our panelists so far. It's been a very interesting and engaging discussion. But we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll have a new panelist, and we'll start to speak to some of the challenges that we see and that we face when it comes to actually addressing this problem of gender-based violence in St. Kitts and Nevis. Thank you.
Has anyone ever touched you here, or here? Well, these are actually bad touches, not good ones. And so, if anyone ever touches you in these areas or anywhere else that makes you uncomfortable, you must say no, then go and tell. Say it with me. Say no, then go and tell.
This message was brought to you by the Department of Gender Affairs in collaboration with Probation and Child Protection Services, the Ministry of Health, and the Pan American Health Organization.
You see that new boy that just joined the school last week? He brought me a chocolate this morning because I showed him the way home from school yesterday.
You like him?
No, he's just my friend. Plus, he is my neighbor. He asked me if we can walk home together for lunch tomorrow, and I told him yes.
I don't like these big boys. They tend to like to touch girls without your consent.
What do you mean by consent?
It's when one person agrees to give permission to another person to do something.
He is cute though.
Guys, you won't believe what happened the other day with the new boy from school.
What happened?
The other day, while walking home with the new guy, he followed me into my house. I thought it was okay because he seemed friendly and respectful. So I turned on the TV and offered him a soda. We sat in the chair together. Then he leaned over and kissed me. I was so shocked I sat up straight and asked him why he did that. He said he thought I liked him. I told him not in that way.
What? Girl, you should have never allowed him inside your parents' home.
My parents will be very angry if they meet any boys in our home plus kissing me.
Guys, we don't need to be burdened down with teen pregnancy and relationship problems at this time. Boys need to understand that girls are not sex objects.
Remember, you have the right to consent to every activity being performed, from holding hands to anything more, and to change your mind at any time. If your partner does not respect your wishes, this also is a form of abuse. If you, your friend or family member is being abused, you can contact one of the numbers listed below for help. Department of Gender Affairs 662-5492, Special Victims Unit 662-662-5492. 465-7077. Counseling Unit 465-5000. This message was brought to you by the Department of Gender Affairs in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and the Pan American Health Organization.
Hi, welcome back to our panel discussion this evening. I'm here, panel discussion hosted by the Department of Gender Affairs to commemorate the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This evening, our topic, we are talking about building back better, facing gender-based violence head-on. And the panelists we have this evening, to reiterate, we have Mr. Vaughn Woodley from Legal Aid. We have Mrs. Chanel Charles from the Department of Gender Affairs. We also had, in our first half, Ms. Nadia Rollins from the Counseling Center, and I am pleased to actually welcome for this half Ms. Mary Keynes, who is the president of the SKN Women's Council, and we will be hearing a bit about what the council is all about and what the work that she does with working with women in this space. So welcome back. Before we went on break, we were just about to get into understanding the challenges that we have. So we had some fruitful discussion about the status of gender-based violence in St. Kitts and Nevis and how we respond to victims, the ways we support victims, the way the law provides certain protections, and the powers that it grants to police officers. So I want us to get into the challenges that we see and that we find. So I think I'll start with Mrs. Charles on this one, just from, department section, since, we understand the department is kind of an intermediary where persons come and you divert and direct and guide persons to the different services and appropriate services available for their case and their situation. So from where you sit, since you have kind of a horizon view, can you tell us a little bit about what the different challenges that you may find and what victims or survivors may experience?
Okay, well, I'm happy that Mr. Woodley is here tonight. So he could better explain, to me and to the public about one of the most, challenging issues that the department is having at this time. Before time, when we get a domestic violence matter, the Special Victims Unit would normally put in an order to the court to get a protection for the victim. But now, I think it started since January, we realized that now all restraining orders have to go to the High Court. In terms of the magistrate court, there were no fees for the victims to pay, which was awesome for us. But now that the orders, the protection order have to go to the High Court, now the victim have to pay. And when it comes to High Court matters, it's expensive to take your case to the High Court. So now what the department is doing is trying to get legal aid and pro bono lawyers to represent the person in court. But the filing fees still stand. Somebody would have to take responsibility for the filing fees, which the department takes responsibility for the filing fees. But at this point, we at the department, the PS, and our acting director, Ms. Celia Christopher, is trying to get it back into the magistrate court. So at this time, I would ask Mr. Woodley to help me understand better, the process, what happened, and if possible, if we can go back to having the cases, being heard at the magistrate court.
Mr. Woodley.
Well, Ms. Charles seems to be setting me up here. Please don't ask why it changed to the High Court, but the challenge, you're indeed correct. It's indeed a challenge, but it's also a benefit.
To whom?
The benefit is that the High Court has more bite. And in our culture, quite often when we get an order from the High Court, it is taken more seriously. So that I would say is the benefit.
Okay.
Yes, in the High Court, it's more rigid, it's more formal, and you incur costs. If it is done by legal aid, I am told, as I would have indicated earlier in the introduction, I've been recently just placed there at Legal Aid. I must say on loan from the Director of Public Prosecutions. And what basically happens if a victim comes in and it is recognized that they are an indigent person or a poor person of low income, then Legal Aid try to find the resources in order to facilitate. I have here some information as to the basic costs. So, for example, you start by filing an application, that's $30. Then there's an affidavit with that application, that's $20. And then there's a draft order, that's $2. And then there is an order, that's $10. Total in amount, just about $64 exactly on the dollar. Okay. Somebody might think, $6 is a lot of money. It's not a lot of money. But if you're working for something like $350 a week, and again, COVID, and in speaking with Ms. Gomes, the director, she said she's seen an increased number of cases of domestic violence. And if it is a case of financial violence or economic violence, $60 can be a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that is only for filing. When it has to come to the actual hearing of the matter in the High Court, then that's another cost. And if you have to go to a private attorney, they have to pay bills.
That's right.
Therefore, the costs can go up. I think the cost in the High Court for these matters run you something like $2,500.
Wow.
Okay, so that might be a drawback, but I wouldn't say there is a bar to seeking justice. Because, as I would have indicated, there is Legal Aid, and Legal Aid tries to help.
Right.
Okay? Legal Aid
Of
tries
course.
to help.
But sometimes too, you can't really overwork Legal Aid because I would say that gender is understaffed, and I know that Legal Aid needs more staff as well.
Well, as you know, only Ms. Gomes is, she was there alone, and then I'm there alone as the only attorney.
Right. So sometimes we have maybe within a month, the most I think we've ever had at one time, it may be like maybe 4 cases. Maybe like 4. I could bring off the top of my head like 4 cases. And I know Ms. Gomes is working on maybe 2 already. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't want to overload her anymore. Let me try and get some pro bono services to see if we could cut down the work, in Legal Aid.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting here from both of your contributions is that challenges that we're seeing is limited resources when it comes to government services being available in regards to not only legal aid, but also within gender affairs to help support any victims or survivors who come in.
Yeah.
And so that's always, when it comes to capacity as, a small island or small island administrations. So limited resources. And then, of course, because of the change that we see in the legislation where we have to now go to the High Court, there's a cost to victims to have to actually seek justice. So that it reduces the access to justice, essentially, because oftentimes we see that individuals, as you say, maybe low income earning, on top of the fact that they have to support children, and, so that does create a challenge.
Right. And I realize, too, that there are seasons that you would have an influxation of, a lot of cases. And that's what I was thinking before. Okay, now there are seasons, but now there's COVID. There's no season. They're just rolling in.
And I mean, the number of reports is indicating that.
Yeah.
I think if we just to reiterate some of the numbers. So in 2020, that's last year. I mean, let's start from 2019. So in 2019, total reports were 87, just 87. Then in 2020, when we started in the midst of the pandemic, reports increased to 359 for the year. That was last year. So we went from 87 to 359. That's more than 300% increase. And then just for this year, 2021 alone, where we know we experienced a lot of lockdowns and shut-ins, just for the first 3 quarters, 443 reports. And, based on, as you said, Ms. Charles, you said there were seasons. I'm very interested. So what were the typical seasons before COVID? Is it Christmas time? Is it New Year's?
We had Christmas, we had during Valentine's, and we had during what we've called music festival.
I see.
Those were our seasons.
And that's and we could theorize that that's connected to the increase in drinking, the increase in people spending money and being at home holiday season. We can theorize, but no, because of COVID, we know, and this is a global phenomenon. It's not unique to St. Kitts and Nevis, and so that's interesting, and it's good to note and to see that not only are persons becoming more confident with reporting, but then the unfortunate aspect is that with the rise, we also see that access has become a little limited because of changes in the Act. So at the very least, in terms of recommendations and what we're advocating for, change it back. We understand the department is trying to work on that. Mr. Woodley, I know you're only at legal aid on loan, but while you're there, you can make this top of your agenda.
I would like to keep him.
Okay, and of course we want to increase capacity. Of course, resources with these departments, because it's a very important issue. It's a social problem, and one that we don't actually get the full scope of, because of course there are persons who are suffering in silence. That's a fact. We know that. And so I just want to kind of now make a little shift and, introduce and bring our NGO representative into the fore, because one of the things, I work for the NGO sector myself as well. And one of the things that I think is important when it comes to non-governmental organization and civil society is that they can tend to help fill gaps where government is unable to spread their resources. Right, and so I'm really pleased to introduce and have on the panel Ms. Keynes from the SKN Women's Council. Now, I'd like us to start. Can you tell us about the SKN Women's Council? What are you? What are you about? What is your mission? What's your mandate? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, good night all, and thank you for having me. Okay, the St. Kitts and Nevis Women's Council, it's a fairly new council and NGO that comprises of various NGOs within the St. Kitts community, St. Kitts and Nevis community. And we were started in 2019. Our aim is to build on the strength of each other, to build a safer nation for women and children within the Federation. And we are a non-profit organization, and it's an entity of women, open to all female, welcome membership participation from all women within the Federation. Our aim is to advocate for women of all race, age, cultural background, promoting justice and equality in a healthy environment. Our aim is to empower women to rise above the economic, domestic, political, and social challenges that halts their progress for a better life, better way of life, and also to facilitate a holistic development for all women to achieve their full potential. So we are more of an advocacy group and a group to empower women within the Federation.
Okay, so you mentioned that it's a coalition. Are you able to give us an idea of what other organizations form this coalition and what the focus of some of those organizations is?
Yes. Okay, we have Silence No More, which is a domestic violence group, and they have come on board with us. We have No Judgment, which is a sexual abuse group. We have CIWIL, which is Caribbean Women in Leadership group. We have also Professional Business Women group. Also as part of the organization, also we have Single Women, Single Mothers group, also as part of the council.
Okay.
So we have a variety of women organizations in support of the council.
Great. So, and that's good to know. So it's always nice to see collaboration and partnership, because oftentimes we work in silos within, society and culture. So it's really good to know that we have this, recently newly formed women's council that actually brings together the work of organizations that are women-centered and women-focused with the objective of building a safer society and space and communities and advocating for women. So can you tell us, though, now, in relation to gender-based violence, recognizing that you have organizations that primarily focus on that, what is the Women's Council's position in terms of the work that you'd like to do or initiatives that you'd like to to undertake when it comes to gender-based violence?
Okay. For us, one of the things that we are hoping to do, first, we have to start with ourselves. So we have a legal representative who will teach us about the laws within the Federation, where the laws might have been a bit of one-sided, there's inequalities in terms of the laws. How do we go about advocating for change? How can we improve the laws in support of being fair to the women and girls within the Federation? So we are learning about those laws before we can step out and actually advocate for those laws to be changed. That's one thing we are doing.
Right now, okay.
All right. Also, we've realized that one thing we've seen is that there is, for women, there's no hotline. That is something that we are trying to work on getting, a hotline for women to call in for support. And having the various NGOs within the council who provide support already to women, we can be a challenge for them to call into the council or call into that hotline, and we make that necessary referrals to persons who are more of an expert. Because I find, at least for me, I'm a novice when it comes to domestic violence and women issues. I'm learning as I go, right? So they have the experience. They've been in contact with persons. Some have been victims themselves, so they have that personal experience. So they can reach out to the persons. We'll make that referral to the necessary entity for them to get that support and the assistance that they need. So right at the moment, we are lobbying to try and get a local hotline for women to call into. Some of the Caribbean islands, when I'm doing my research, some of the Caribbean islands already have one in place. So it's for us here locally to have one within the Federation.
Great. So two things that you said there in terms of what you're doing. So I really commend the council for taking the initiative to self-educate. That's very important in terms of understanding the law and the legal frameworks around it. So just tonight we've heard of one area that you guys can advocate on.
Yes,
let's get it changed back to magistrate and not the high court. And then also I think definitely a hotline, because one of the things a hotline typically provides is anonymity.
Right.
And I think people would appreciate the anonymity of being able to just call a hotline, and even if it's just to talk to somebody, to be able to be able for them to just to have a conversation, especially when you're in a moment where you feel like you're going crazy because of this emotional abuse, or you just want somebody to reach out to say it can be very helpful, and it can be. And so I definitely encourage and commend the council for taking this initiative, and I really wish you all the best, the best of luck with that in terms of actually getting that established, because I do believe it's something that can be extremely helpful and extremely valuable for persons who might be experiencing violence in their homes and personal relationships. Now, I want to throw a question out over to Chanel now, just in terms of the department and the way the department is able to work and connect with NGOs like the Women's Council. So, obviously you mentioned that limited resources is a thing. So what would you say is the relationship like with, the department and the work that you guys do together or not?
No, we actually do have that relationship. When it comes to the Women's Council, we realized that, that voice was missing for us in the council. There was a previous Women's Council, but, became dormant. So, we sat down and we thought that, there's a Men's Council. So why not have our women's voices being heard? I don't want to say better heard from a woman, but,
Right.
Let's hear it from the women. And then, we, from 16 days campaign, we normally get the NGOs involved. So to get the Women's Council together, that was one of our ideas. If we can bring each representative from a women's NGO and form the council, that would be great for us. Because the things that we can't get done, the NGO would be able to get it done, with our support on board. So the relationship with the council is wonderful.
That's great.
We also have that relationship also with the men's council, because gender affairs also have a men's platform, and that's a male in our department who mans that platform, and he would take care of the men's issues, and he would go to the men's council meetings. He would give his advice. He would get into whatever solutions or issues that they are having. So yes, gender is quite entwined with the council. I must say tonight that we have an awesome relationship with Special Victims Unit as well. They're just like a phone call away for us. And a part of getting justice done for victims, we have to work together.
Absolutely.
We have to work together. In terms of counseling unit, that's a part of our ministry as well, the counseling unit. And, legal aid, the same thing. Alethea is just a call away. So now I know Mr. Vaughn Woodley is just a call away. So gender is, well supported.
That's great.
By our outside supporters. Well, I don't want to call them supporters because we all, working towards the same goal. So we have that type of relationship, around us. So we work well together.
That's good. And that's extremely valuable in relation to the issue. So it's good to know that the department also is working with NGO sector and also with other government departments and agencies to ensure that, as you said, the process can be fulfilled, which is what I understand the Department of Gender Affairs ensures they oversee whenever they have victims or survivors coming in, to ensure they have that support. Now, I would just want to take a pause and let our viewers and listeners know that you are welcome to join the conversation. We're inviting persons to join the conversation. If you have comments, if you have feedback, if you have suggestions, you have recommendations, if you have commendations, anything at all, emotional outbursts, feel free. If you want to call in, the numbers are 466-2666 or 662-8674. 767-4765, or if you're overseas, it is 1-239-645-4500. So again, our lines are open if you want to join the conversation and share a comment, or if you have a question for any of the panelists, please feel free to do so. We welcome engagement from the public, absolutely, because this is a societal issue, and so we definitely want to hear from you, our viewers and listeners. So I would like to, just at this time, so as we kind of move on to wrapping up the conversation, I'm a big solutions person. So always interested in finding ways how we can improve upon our situation, and that's the theme and the topic for today, building back better and facing gender-based violence head-on. So I'm just curious to know from each of you, from your positions and where you stand, or where you sit, in your respective departments and in your respective roles, what would you say is, what's a recommendation that you might have in terms of being able to better support victims, to better provide assistance, or to improve the system itself in terms of responding? Do you have a recommendation yourself? What is something that you would like to see in relation to addressing this problem of gender-based violence in St. Kitts and Nevis?
Well, I believe that besides the recommendation first, we have to do more awareness, right? Sometimes persons may say, well, I'm hearing them every 16 days campaign. But if we do more awareness, I believe that people will be more comfortable calling, because sometimes it's just to, get the client's trust, get the victim's trust that, you can come to gender affairs and you can get justice. That's all they need to know. And sometimes, I'm not saying that, everybody, 100% of the victims would get, that type of assistance that they need, whether in legal, whether in social services, whether in counseling, they would not. But if, we can advocate more, if we can sensitize more, I believe that we could get more victims getting our trust in terms of men especially, because men tends to pull back a little more. Because I've had clients who spoke about, not having the full support, of the police. I'm not bashing the police per se, but, a smirk, something as simple as a smirk can turn that victim away.
Absolutely.
And, they've talked about, the discrimination within the public. When, for them to talk about the issue, they will get things like, you're a man. Yeah, why don't you take care of your home? Right? And truth and in fact, some men, they are not as strong or not as forceful as other men are. But from our standpoint, we are working more and more sensitization. We are getting back into gender sensitization programs, where we can start sensitizing the public. And when I say the public, we've done that before, but now we are looking at going into the schools itself, because we have to start from the children. If we don't start from the children, the problem will continue to exist. So if we could start from the children, I'm looking at, over the years, some of these cases, will reduce. Because if we educate the children from a very young age and we educate the parents, I don't think that, this social ill, would continue to plague us. I don't want to think that, we are more proactive kind of society, right? But we want to deal with the issue at hand and straight to the point, per se.
Right. So you mentioned a couple of things that I think is very important, as you say. So one, the education in terms of understanding, we do need to break our understanding of gender normativities. And that definitely is an education thing, where, we understand that males do and act a certain way and women act and do a certain way, and we need to break those normativities and recognize that we're all just human beings and we all have equal access to the full experience of humanity, and we can all cry, we can all be sad, we all have both masculine and feminine energy, and that's okay. Some have more than others, and that's okay, but we don't necessarily have to fit into a specific gender box. And hopefully, with, as you said, the education around gender and hopefully breaking some of these norms that we all know so well can help to shift the conversation and shift our understandings. And then another thing you mentioned, is when it comes to, let's say, for example, males who might report being abused by their partner who is female, that, just the reception of police officers may not always be as sensitive as it perhaps should be. It may be different to if it were a woman. So it sounds like perhaps, the police could benefit from some sensitization training. Right. Of course, I think that was part and parcel of having a special victims unit established, where we have officers who are more inclined to be able to respond to these sensitive issues. But of course, I believe the process is that when you call the police, a standard police officer shows up to respond, and then they transfer to SVU. I believe that's the process. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
They can make a statement or a report at any station, but the process is, once you make a report or a statement, at maybe a different zone, they will refer the matter to Special Victims Unit.
Right. But initially you report to the police station.
You can, anywhere.
Anywhere. And so I think it's important for all police officers to have some kind of sensitization training when it comes to dealing with victims of gender-based or domestic violence. Because that's important. Because as you said, absolutely, if I've experienced this, and I'm sure Ms. Rollins would be able to say yes or no, but the kind of emotions that you experience, you already have so much shame, and you go to the police station and the police officer responds is, I'm gonna be like, I'm sorry, not today. Right? That's an automatic turn off. And so I think that's a very important recommendation on top of public education and sensitization, which is always important when it comes to shifting culture and shifting behavior. And so I'm opening up for anyone else on the panel in terms of where you sit and the work that you do. Do you have any recommendations, anything that you'd like to see? Mr. Woodley, working, I know you said you're recently in legal aid, but from the, public prosecutor, position, I'm always very curious. I don't know if you have numbers off the top of your head as to how many persons, we know we have reports, we have the numbers for how many cases are reported, but do you have a sense or an estimate of how many cases are then charged and tried and, convicted? Do you have like a convictions, purview in relation to cases of domestic violence off the top of your head that you can give us?
Well, no, I don't like to guess.
Okay.
I don't have,
Much
but
respect.
I can say that we have a very good conviction rate at the department.
Okay, that's good to know.
I would say we have a very good conviction rate with regards to matters.
I'm not going to say you're biased, but it's okay. I believe you. I believe
might
you.
be a bias. But the obvious thing I would like to say, or I would like to see rather, is that matters can proceed in the magistrate court again.
Okay.
It's not difficult to amend the present legislation. It can be amended. It's by a stroke of a pen.
Okay.
It can be amended so that matters can proceed in the magistrate's court again.
Great.
I must say, however, though, and I would like to repeat it, there is still protection in the High Court, and good protection. And this legislation gives really good protection to victims of domestic violence. So I don't want the listening audience or the viewing audience to become confused and say, well, they are shut out of justice.
Right.
You see?
And that's absolutely not what we're saying. I've read the Act myself. It does provide some very good protections.
Yeah.
And again, want to reiterate that even if you are not a victim, you are in a position where you can call the police, and the police has a duty to respond, and so that process of protection can be initiated even if you're not a victim in a case. And so that's, I think, important for persons to know, because we have to be in a society, we have to be a society that condemns this kind of violence, and also, take our own, role and part in trying to combat the violence. So, Ms. Keynes, over to you. What would you like to see? Especially, the Women's Council is newly formed. What would you like to see happen?
Okay, during the 6 weeks, 16 days of activism, we have branched out. We started a public awareness in the rural areas, and we have invited the different government entities that deals with gender-based violence and domestic violence to partner with us and go out into the community and share the information. What are their roles? How do they help victims? How do victims get to come to them? And the first clinic we had was in Molyneux, and that yield a small percentage of persons, but we had that impact to somebody. It made a change for someone. And that is something that we can continue, where we partner with each other and bring that awareness to the communities, especially in the rural areas, because they need that support. We do a lot in the Bastia area, but we need to start branching out into the rural area to provide that support. For our next clinic, which will be in St. Paul's on the 11th, we will have our legal representative to be part of that, along with the other entities that was there from in Molyneux. So we are growing, and we want that to continue, that discussion, what we call is conversations with the general public, and bringing that awareness about how to go about dealing with these issues. We are not alone, and it affects every one of us.
Absolutely.
In the statistics, 1 in 3 women has been affected by gender-based violence, domestic violence. And that's a lot within at least a household of 5. You can say that's 3 persons in that household alone has experienced it. And that's a lot. So imagine a whole community. So once we bring that awareness to the communities around St. Kitts and Nevis, it helps to make persons more appreciative and want to feel more empowered that the help and the support is there for them and want to reach out.
Absolutely. So thank you for that, and thank you for the work that you're doing. I attended one of your sessions. It was great. So really appreciate the work that you're doing and hope that it continues. And as you said, understanding, for persons to understand, members of the public to understand that resources are available, that support is out there, and I would grant Chanel an opportunity to actually share some of these resources and help people to understand, like, know what is out there and what numbers they might want to call or contact in just a minute. But just before that, I do want to say, I guess, Miss Rollins is not on the table now, but just based on the conversation we had with her earlier in the first half, I think for us to normalize seeking mental health support and counseling, especially if you are experiencing some form of domestic abuse or violence, to be able to seek this kind of support, because it is very important and very beneficial and very valuable in ways that you may not even imagine before you attend. So definitely, I think, just to put a plug there, since we had a representative from the National Counseling Center. But over to you, Ms. Charles, in terms of the other supports that are offered and available for us in the different communities and in the public.
Okay, so we have some of the services that we provide. We have some of the representative here already, so it's just for me to mention the number. Tonight, I just want to thank Ms. Keynes here, who have pushed the initiative forward to get a phone for the council where women can call and discuss issues and to see what type of help beyond what they are already receiving can get. So Special Victims Unit have an on-call phone that anybody can call at any time. It's on call. It's not a hotline, but you can call it at any time. And that's 662-7077. And we have the counseling unit, 465-5000. And there's the Department of Gender Affairs, 662-5492. Probation and Child Protection Services, 662-6833. And on board now we have the SKN Women's Council, which is 662-7569. So these are the numbers and the services that they can access. So if you don't feel comfortable coming straight to Gender Affairs, you can call the Women's Council. They can direct you whether back to me with more explanation of, okay, these are the services that Gender Affairs can provide. So, you can go back, there's somebody that you can talk to, who is sensitive to these issues, just to get them into the system of, okay, this is where I can get the help. Okay, so these are the numbers. Once again, Special Victims Unit, 662-7077, Counseling Unit, 465-5000, Gender Affairs, 662-5492, Probation and Child Protection Services, 662-6833, and the Women's Council, 662-7569.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. And if anybody wants to, you guys also available on social media. Sometimes people just have their phone. They may not be able to call, but they can send you a direct message. So you can also find the Department of Gender Affairs on social media, as well as the Women's Council. So, Mr. Woodley, are you able to provide us with information for like the legal aid? Because we also take walk-ins, I understand.
Yes, we take walk-ins, as I would have indicated to the staff when I got there, because of the nature of what we do and the services that we offer. If you have a situation, you can come in at any time. The department opens between the hours of 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and you can state whatever your matter is.
Where is the office located?
It is located at West Independence Square Street.
Okay, so West Independence Square Street, and feel free to walk in at any time, even if somebody just have a question?
Even if you have a question, you can walk in and we will try to assist you.
Okay, great to know. So we are now at 5:02. I believe we need now time to wrap up. I want to thank the panelists this evening for their perspective, for all the information that they shared, their expertise from where they sit in their respective positions. Thank you very much for your contributions. I think it's been a very interesting and informative discussion. I quite enjoyed it. So I want to thank you for that. And of course, just to leave everybody and reiterate some of the points and areas where we can focus our attention in relation to improving upon, the state of gender-based violence and combating this social problem. We know that there are these, limited resources when it comes to government, and, there are certain costs that are associated that we understand that not only Gender Affairs, but also the Women's Council and also, legal aid is trying to advocate for getting the shift and change back to matters being processed in the magistrate courts, which would then remove the cost that we see for processing in the High Court, and that would be for certainly valuable for victims to be able to access justice more fairly. And also, of course, public education continues. I think that's a big part of the 16 days of activism campaign and activities that Gender Affairs is doing. This panel itself is part of the public education and awareness raising and sensitization that we're doing. So I really do hope that you, all your viewers and listeners, have found this discussion particularly edifying and interesting, and that you learned something new, even if it's just to understand and recognize how common domestic violence is and how prevalent it is, and the fact that reports have been on the rise, and even so that it's not even truly reflective of the problem that we have when it comes to domestic violence and intimate partner violence within the Federation. So with that, I would like to thank panelists again. Thank you very much for viewers and listeners. And if you need anything, of course, you can direct your questions and inquiries to the Department of Gender Affairs. Check out the Women's Council on Facebook, also the National Counseling Center, and also Legal Aid in Bastia. So thank you all very much for tuning in. That's all for this evening.
It's been 6 months now and Glenn hasn't been working. His attitude has completely changed and he's been leaving the house every day for hours and liming with his friends and coming home drunk and causing confusion.
Gloria, this is what you cook today? This is not enough food for a big man like me.
But Glenn, it's been 6 months now. You haven't given me any money to shop for food.
Okay, so what you want me to do if my boss ain't call me out for work as yet?
Look for a different job now.
What you just said to me?
Get a next job.
What?
Help! Let me go!
Let go what? Yeah, let's see what we happening. Let go what? Watch them out with me now.
Every day mom and dad fight. When are they going to stop?
Domestic violence is not just physical, it's mental, emotional, economical, and psychological. If you, your friend or family member is being abused, you can contact one of the numbers listed below for help. Department of Gender Affairs 662-5492, Special Victims Unit 662-7077, Counseling Unit 465-5000. This message was brought to you by the Department of Gender Affairs in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and the Pan American Health Organization.
Has anyone ever touched you here, here, or here? Well, these are actually bad touches, not good ones. And so, if anyone ever touches you in these areas or anywhere else that makes you uncomfortable, you must say no, then go and tell. Say it with me. Say no, then go and tell.
This message was brought to you by the Department of Gender Affairs in collaboration with Probation and Child Protection Services, the Ministry of Health, and the Pan American Health Organization.